You wake up. The room is dark. Your phone says 2:43 in the morning, and before you even reach for water, before you even register where you are, there it is. A ringing, high-pitched, persistent, coming from your left ear only, not your right, your left. And it does not stop. You shake your head. You press your finger gently against the side of your face. Nothing changes. You lie back down. You stare at the ceiling. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a question surfaces that you cannot name yet. A question older than you, older than your language, older than the building you are sleeping in. What is happening to me right now? Most people will tell you it is nothing. They will say, you slept on that side too long, you have fluid buildup, you need to see a doctor. Tinnitus is extremely common, half the world experiences it, and they are not entirely wrong. But here is the thing. A group of ancient texts buried underground in the Egyptian desert for nearly 2,000 years, texts that the early church tried to destroy, texts that describe the architecture of reality in a way that modern neuroscience has barely begun to understand. Those texts have an answer. Not a metaphor, not a poem, a specific, detailed, technical answer. And when you read what the Nag Hammadi Codices say about what happens to human consciousness between the hours of 2 and 4 in the morning, you will never look at that ringing the same way again. My name is not important. What matters is what you are about to hear. In 1945, a farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman was digging near a cliff called Jabal al-Tarif in a region of Upper Egypt close to the ancient city of Nag Hammadi. He was looking for fertilizer, a soft, powdery soil that Egyptian farmers had been mining from around ancient graves for centuries. His mattock struck something hard. He thought it might be a buried spirit, an entity sealed underground, and for a moment he hesitated. He almost walked away, but hunger wins over fear, and he kept digging. What he pulled from the ground that day was a large sealed jar, nearly a meter tall, red clay, and inside it were 13 leather-bound books, codices, manuscripts written in Coptic on sheets of papyrus, wrapped and sealed, and placed in the earth sometime around the 4th century. He brought them home. His mother burned several of the pages to start cooking fires. The rest were eventually sold, traded, smuggled across borders, and, after decades of academic wrangling, translated and published for the first time in 1977. What those books contain changed everything scholars thought they knew about early Christianity, about the nature of God, about the structure of the universe, and about what human beings actually are. The Nag Hammadi Library, as it is now called, contains 52 separate texts. Some you may have heard of, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Truth, but others are far stranger. The Apocryphon of John, the Hypostasis of the Archons, on the origin of the world, the reality of the rulers. And inside these texts is an entire cosmological system, a map of existence, a description of who built this reality, how it was built, why it was built wrong, and what is being done right now, at this very moment, to keep you from remembering who you really are. To understand what these texts say about your left ear ringing at 3 in the morning, you need to understand the world they describe. And that world is not the world you were taught in Sunday school. According to the Gnostic tradition preserved in the Nag Hammadi Codices, the material universe was not created by the highest God. It was created by a lesser being, a being who emerged from a cosmic mistake, a being who did not fully understand what it was doing, a being who looked around at the void and said, in the words of the Apocryphon of John, I am God, and there is no other God besides me. He did not know his mother. He did not know where he came from. His name in the Gnostic texts is Yaldabaoth. Sometimes he is called Saklas, which means fool. Sometimes he is called Samael, which means blind God. And he created the material world, including the human body, including time, including the physical sensation of being a creature trapped in flesh, as a prison. Not from malice exactly, from ignorance. He built a cage without knowing he was building a cage because he himself was inside a cage he could not see. Around him he placed helpers, assistants. The texts call them Archons. The word comes from the Greek word for rulers, governors, administrators. There are 7 of them in most versions of the story, corresponding to the 7 classical planets of ancient cosmology: Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, the Moon. Each Archon governs a layer of reality, Each one is described in the Nag Hammadi texts not as a demon in the medieval sense, not as a horned creature, but as a kind of administrative intelligence, a pattern of control, a frequency, a signal. And here is where your left ear enters the story. The Apocryphon of John, one of the oldest and most detailed of the Gnostic texts, describes the Archons doing something very specific to human beings. They are not content to simply build the prison. They actively maintain it. They monitor it. And their primary mechanism of control is not violence. It is not fear, at least not primarily. It is interference. The text uses a word that translators have rendered as disturbance, perturbation, a kind of noise introduced into the system. The Archons, in the Gnostic framework, are described as entities that communicate through frequency, through the subtle architecture of perception, through the channels of sensory experience that the human nervous system uses to interpret reality. In other words, they talk through the body. And the left side, in the Gnostic and broader ancient Near Eastern tradition, has a specific and significant meaning. The left side is the side of reception. In the ancient world, this was not superstition. This was physics as they understood it. The right hand acts, the left hand receives. The right side of the body, controlled by the left hemisphere of the brain, is the side of language, analysis, the construction of logical narrative. The left side of the body, controlled by the right hemisphere, is the side of pattern recognition, spatial awareness, the perception of things that exist outside the normal structures of language. It is the side that processes what cannot be explained in words. In the Hebrew Bible, which the Gnostics knew intimately, the left hand of God is the hand of justice. But in the deeper tradition, the left side is also the side of the unconscious, the side that hears what the waking mind filters out. When your left ear rings between 2 and 4 in the morning, the Nag Hammadi tradition says something specific is happening. You are receiving a signal. The question is, from what? And this is where the texts split into 2 possible answers. Both of them should terrify you, but for very different reasons. The first answer is the one that comes from the hypostasis of the Archons and from On the Origin of the World. These texts describe the Archons as beings who monitor human consciousness during specific periods of lowered resistance. The ancient world understood sleep not as a passive state, but as a period of vulnerability. Your waking consciousness, the part of you that constructs a coherent narrative about who you are and what is real, goes offline during sleep. The Archons, in the Gnostic framework, understood this. They used it. The period between 2 and 4 in the morning, sometimes called the third watch of the night in ancient Jewish tradition, was identified across dozens of cultures as the time when the boundary between the material world and whatever exists beyond it becomes most permeable. The Egyptians called it the duat, the liminal hour. The Chinese tradition calls it the Gui hour, the hour of the ghost. The ancient Mesopotamian texts from the library of Ashurbanipal describe it as the hour when the watchers walk. And the Gnostic texts describe it as the period when the Archons have the most direct access to human perception. The left ear ringing, according to this interpretation, is not a malfunction. It is a tap on the line. It is the sound of something moving through the frequency of your nervous system, something that wants your consciousness directed outward toward distraction, toward anxiety, toward the endless loop of mental noise that keeps you from going deeper. The Archons in the Gnostic system are not trying to terrify you at 3 in the morning. They are trying to keep you on the surface. They are trying to prevent you from descending into the part of yourself that knows the truth about what you are. But there is a second answer, and this one is older, quieter, and far more beautiful. The Gospel of Truth, written by Valentinus in the 2nd century and preserved in the Nag Hammadi Codices, describes something the Gnostics called the pneuma, the spirit, the divine spark. Every human being, according to this text, carries inside them a fragment of the highest consciousness, the true God, the pleroma, the fullness that existed before Yaldabaoth made his mistake, before the material universe was constructed, before time began. That spark did not ask to be here. It was captured, embedded in matter, surrounded by the noise of physical existence. But it has never stopped trying to communicate. It has never stopped trying to wake you up. The Gospel of Truth uses an extraordinary image. It says that the Father, the true God, spoke a word into the dark, and that word entered matter and became lost. And the entire story of existence is the story of that word trying to find its way back. The entire history of human longing, every moment of inexplicable sadness, every feeling of being a stranger in your own life, every dream that felt more real than waking reality. The Gospel of Truth says these are not accidents. These are the word calling to itself. The divine spark inside you, reaching out through the only channels it has available, the channels of the body, the channels of sensory experience, the subtle frequencies that your conscious mind is usually too loud to hear. Between 2 and 4 in the morning, when the waking mind goes quiet, when the narrative machine in your left hemisphere finally slows down, something becomes possible that is not possible during the day. The pneuma can communicate more directly, and the channel it prefers, according to the Gnostic framework, is exactly the one that the Archons also prefer. The left side, the receptive side, the side that processes what lies outside language. The ringing is not tinnitus, or rather, tinnitus is the physical translation of something that does not have a physical name yet. Think about what the Apocryphon of John says about how the Archons built the human nervous system. This is one of the most disturbing passages in the entire Nag Hammadi corpus. The text describes the construction of the human body in extraordinary anatomical detail. It lists the names of the Archons responsible for different systems. The one assigned to the nervous system is described as a being whose function is to create the sensation of isolation, the sensation that you are a separate creature with no connection to anything larger than yourself. The word used in the Coptic text can be translated as interference, static, and the primary mechanism of that static is described as a kind of sound, a frequency that runs through the perceptual system at all times, so constant that you stop hearing it. The way you stop hearing traffic if you live near a highway. But sometimes, in the deep watch of the night, the static becomes audible again, because something else is cutting through it. Here is what you need to understand about the specific time window. 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. is not arbitrary. In the ancient Jewish reckoning that the Gnostics inherited, the night was divided into 4 watches. The first watch ran from sunset to approximately 9 p.m., the second watch from 9 p.m. to midnight, the third watch from midnight to 3 a.m., the fourth watch from 3 a.m. to sunrise. The third watch was the watch of the deep sleeper, the watch when consciousness was considered most completely submerged. It is in the third watch that the Hebrew Bible places some of its most significant spiritual events. When God passed through Egypt on the Passover night, the text of Exodus 12:29 says it was at midnight, the midpoint of the deep watch. When the young Samuel heard the voice calling his name in the tabernacle at Shiloh, the text places it in the middle of the night. When Elijah heard the still small voice on the mountain after the earthquake and the fire, it came in a silence that the original Hebrew describes as the sound of absolute stillness, a kol damama daka, a thin, hair-fine sound that was heard precisely because everything louder had stopped. The Nag Hammadi texts know this tradition. They were written by people who had memorized the Hebrew scriptures, who had studied in Alexandria, who had access to Egyptian, Persian, and Babylonian cosmological traditions that modern scholarship has only partially reconstructed. And what those people said across multiple texts was this: the third watch is the crack in the armor. It is the moment when the machinery of ordinary consciousness loosens its grip. And through that crack, something gets through. Whether what gets through is interference from the Archons or communication from the pneuma, the texts say, depends on you. Specifically, it depends on what you have been doing with your waking mind, what you have been feeding it, what questions you have been carrying, because the third watch does not generate new content. It amplifies what is already there. If your waking life has been filled with noise, consumption, distraction, the maintenance of the surface, then the third watch gives you more noise. If your waking life has been oriented toward depth, toward asking real questions, toward the kind of attention that the Gnostics called gnosis, direct knowledge, not belief, not faith, not doctrine, but actual experience of what you are, then the third watch becomes something else entirely. Listen to what the Gospel of Philip says about this. This is one of the most strange and beautiful texts in the entire collection. Philip says, "The hidden things of truth are revealed in types and images. Those who are clothed in perfect light cannot be seen by the powers and cannot be detained by them. But what you carry in your heart is what speaks in the night." He is describing something precise. The quality of your inner life determines the quality of what reaches you when the defenses drop. And now, here is the piece that most people miss when they read the Nag Hammadi texts. Because most people get to the part about the Archons and the Demiurge and the prison of matter and they stop there. They think, this is a dark story. This is a cosmic horror story. We are trapped in a simulation built by a blind god and maintained by administrative entities who use our nervous systems as receiver arrays. That is the end of it. There is no way out, but that is not what the texts say. That is not even close to what the texts say. The Gospel of Truth, which Irenaeus of Lyon considered so dangerous that he wrote an entire book attacking it in the 2nd century, says this: "Ignorance of the Father brought about anguish and terror, and the anguish grew solid like a fog so that no one was able to see. For this reason error became powerful, but when the light shone through, error was dissolved. It had no root. It remained only in a fog concerning the Father, involved in forgetfulness, in dread. But the forgetfulness did not exist, nor the dread alongside the Father. Forgetfulness existed because the Father was not known. But if the Father were known, forgetfulness would not have existed from that moment on." Read that again, because it is one of the most radical statements in the history of religious thought. The Gnostic answer to the prison is not escape. It is not a ritual. It is not a set of instructions. It is recognition. The moment you recognize what you actually are, what the divine spark inside you actually is, the architecture of control does not disappear, but you are no longer inside it in the same way. The Archons cannot interfere with what they cannot find, and what they cannot find is consciousness that has turned inward toward its own source. This is why the ringing in the left ear matters, not as a curse, not as a diagnosis, as a signal that the threshold is opening, as the sound of the thin, hair-fine frequency that runs beneath the noise of ordinary existence, becoming briefly audible. The question is whether you are oriented to receive it, or whether you roll over and go back to sleep. Now, before I go further, I need to tell you about something that connects directly to what we are discussing. If you want to go deeper into the prophetic framework that underlies all of this, the signs that the biblical texts say you need to recognize right now, there is a resource called 7 Shocking Signs that God warns about the end times. The link is in the description below. Only available while this video is running. This material is not available anywhere else. Click the link and get your copy while you still can. Let us go back to the texts, because there is something in the Apocryphon of John that I have not told you yet, something that changes the entire picture. The Apocryphon of John describes the moment when the highest God decided to act. Not the Demiurge, not Yaldabaoth, but the true Father, the invisible Spirit, the incomprehensible one whose nature is described in the text as light, as life, as the voice of light that becomes word. This Father looks at the world that Yaldabaoth has made and decides to insert something into it, not to destroy it, not to override it, to light it from within. The mechanism the Father uses is called epinoia. The word is Greek, and it means something like afterthought, reflection, the thought that comes after the first thought, the awareness that becomes aware of itself. In the Apocryphon of John, epinoia is described as a kind of light being, a luminous helper who enters the material creation and inhabits it, not as a ruler, not as a power, as a voice, as a presence that whispers. The text says that the Archons could see the human form but could not perceive the light that animated it. They could access the nervous system but they could not touch the pneuma. They could introduce static but they could not silence the voice of epinoia, because epinoia did not operate on the frequencies they controlled. Epinoia in the Apocryphon of John is described as speaking to Adam from within, from inside the human consciousness, in the deep watches of the night, in the moments of silence between thoughts. in the perceptual register that lies below language. The text says that Epinoia taught him self-knowledge. She woke him up, and the Archons could not stop her because they could not hear her. Their frequency range did not extend to where she was operating. Now, 2,000 years later, you are lying in the dark at 2:43 in the morning, and your left ear is ringing. The Nag Hammadi tradition says the ringing itself is the body's translation of something it does not have the architecture to fully express. The human auditory system is not designed to process certain kinds of information. When that information arrives anyway, when a signal enters the nervous system that bypasses the usual channels, the auditory cortex does what it can. It renders the signal as sound. High frequency, persistent, localized. A signal that is not nothing. A signal that is not random. A signal that is the thin whisper of Epinoia cutting through the static of the Archons in the only moment when the static is thin enough to cut through. Left ear, not right, because the right ear is the ear of the waking mind, the ear of language processing, the ear of everything that can be said and explained and categorized. The left ear is the ear that registers what cannot be said, the ear that processes the pattern beneath the pattern, the signal beneath the signal, the ear that the gospel of truth calls the ear of the heart. Hear what you have inside you as something good. Take heed of yourself. Do not wait for something outside of yourself to tell you what you already know. That is the language of the Nag Hammadi texts, not the language of doctrine, not the language of law, the language of direct experience, the language of waking up. But here is what the texts also warn, and this is the part that most commentators leave out because it complicates the story and they are not sure what to do with it. The Gospel of Philip says something extraordinary about the left and right in the context of spiritual perception. It says, light and darkness, life and death, right and left are brothers of one another. They are inseparable. Because of this, neither are the good good, nor are the evil evil, nor is life life, nor is death death. For this reason, each one will dissolve into its earliest origin. What Philip is warning about is this: the same channel that carries the signal from Epinoia can also carry interference from the Archons. They use the same frequency range. They are, in the deep structure of the Gnostic system, mirror images of each other. This is why the ancient tradition consistently says that spiritual discernment is not about the experience itself, but about what you do with it. A ringing in the left ear at 3 in the morning is not automatically a divine message. It is an opening. An opening can let in light or let in something else, depending on what you are oriented toward. The Gnostics had a practice for this. The texts do not describe it in step-by-step format because they were not instructional manuals. They were maps for people who already had guides, teachers in the Gnostic communities who transmitted the practice person to person. But the fragments we can reconstruct from the texts point toward something consistent. When the signal comes, you do not interpret it. You do not try to decode it. You do not reach for meaning. You turn toward it with the same quality of attention that you would bring to looking directly at a source of light. You bring your awareness to the center of the experience, not the sound, not the physical sensation, the presence behind the sound, the source of the signal, and you wait. The Gospel of Thomas, the most famous of the Nag Hammadi texts, puts it with characteristic bluntness, saying 7, "Blessed is the lion which becomes man when consumed by man. And cursed is the man whom the lion consumes, and the lion becomes man." Thomas is not talking about animals. He is talking about the meeting between different levels of consciousness. When you consume the experience, when you bring your full awareness to it, and it becomes part of your understanding, you are blessed. When the experience consumes you, when the ringing becomes anxiety, and the anxiety becomes sleeplessness, and the sleeplessness becomes a spiral, the lion has eaten the man. The Archons have achieved what they wanted. The difference in the Gnostic framework is not willpower. It is orientation. It is what your consciousness is fundamentally pointed toward. And this is where the Nag Hammadi Codices connect to something that even people who have never heard of Gnosticism will recognize immediately. Because the question they are asking is the same question that has been asked in every wisdom tradition on earth. The question of where you put your attention. the question of what you are fundamentally in service to. The question that the deepest parts of the biblical tradition are also asking underneath the history and the law and the prophecy, in the place where the still small voice lives. There is a passage in the book of Job, chapter 33, verses 14 through 16, that has puzzled commentators for centuries. Elihu is speaking to Job in the whirlwind of his suffering, and Elihu says, "For God speaks once and twice, but man does not perceive it. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls upon men, in slumbering upon the bed, then he opens the ears of men and seals their instruction." The word translated as seals in the original Hebrew is chatam. It means to stamp, to impress, to seal, as with a signet ring. In the ancient world, a seal was not a mark of secrecy. A seal was a mark of authenticity. A seal meant this is real. This is from a genuine source. This has not been tampered with. Elihu is describing the third watch. He is describing what happens in the deep watches of the night when human perception opens in ways that the waking mind closes. And he is saying that God, the true source, the source that the Gnostics called the Father of the All, the pleroma, the fullness, uses this opening to seal instruction directly into human consciousness. Not through language, not through doctrine, through direct impression. Through the channel that the Nag Hammadi texts call the ear of the heart. Your left ear is ringing at 3 in the morning, and across 2 millennia, from the limestone cliffs of Jabal al-Tarif in Upper Egypt to wherever you are lying right now in the dark, something is trying to reach you. The question is not what it is. The Nag Hammadi Codices spend hundreds of pages on that question, and they do not agree with each other. The question is whether you are pointed toward it, whether your waking life has been cultivating the quality of attention that can receive it, whether the noise you have been feeding yourself during the day has been the kind of noise that the Archons generate, the noise of consumption, of distraction, of the endless self-narrative, or whether there has been, somewhere in the architecture of your days, some practice of genuine stillness, some moment of turning toward the source of your own consciousness and asking what is actually there. Because here is what the Gospel of Truth says at its very end, in one of the most stunning passages in all of ancient literature. It says, "What a gift that those who are seeking the Father of the All found him. And when they found him, they learned who he is." That is the gnosis. That is the direct knowledge, not information about the Father, not doctrine about the Father, the Father. And when they found him, they rested in him. And they were no longer weary with seeking, for they had found him and they were at rest. And he kissed them on the mouth, and they received light through his kiss. This is what the gift of gnosis is: light through a kiss, in the dark, in the silence of the third watch, in the thin sound that comes from no visible source and cannot be explained by fluid in the inner ear or stress or dehydration. In the signal that your left ear is receiving right now, if you know how to be still enough to hear what it is carrying beneath the carrier wave. The men who hid the Nag Hammadi Codices in that jar, who sealed them and buried them under the cliff at the edge of the desert, knew that what was inside those books was too dangerous for the world they were living in. Dangerous not because it was false, but because it was true in a way that the powers of that world could not afford to have known. They buried the truth in the earth and they waited. 1400 years, 1600 years, 1800 years, until a farmer digging in the wrong place for the wrong reasons struck something hard and reached into the dark and pulled out the sound of a door that had been sealed a very long time ago. That door is still open. It opened in 1945 and nobody has managed to close it again. And somewhere between 2 and 4 in the morning, in the third watch of the night, when your defenses are down and the noise of ordinary existence has gone quiet, and your left ear begins to fill with a sound that has no source in the physical room you are lying in, you are standing at that door. What you do next is the entire question. Before I leave you with that question, I want to make sure you have something in your hand. The prophetic signs that the biblical texts say are unfolding right now are described in specific, verifiable detail in a resource called 7 Shocking Signs that God warns about the end times. The link is in the description of this video. This is only available while this video is running, so do not wait. Get your copy now. The earth gave back what was buried in it, not because the time was right, because someone reached in and pulled. The codices were supposed to be burned. They were supposed to be ash by the 4th century. Instead, they were wrapped in leather, sealed in clay, and handed to the ground, which kept them the way the ground keeps everything, perfectly, unchanged, exactly as they were on the day they went in, because the ground does not judge what is worth keeping. The ground keeps everything. And one day, always, what was placed in it comes back out. You wake up. The room is dark. Your left ear is ringing. And now you know that in the hills above the Nile, in a jar sealed with pitch, in a library that was supposed to have been destroyed 16 centuries ago, someone left you a message. They did not know your name. They did not know what year you would be born, but they knew the hour. They knew the watch of the night when consciousness thins to a membrane and what lies beneath it becomes briefly audible. They buried the message for the exact moment you are in right now, and the message is simply this: what you are is more than what you have been told. Listen.